Hello and welcome to another World Values Day conversation, all around the topic of values. And today I'm really excited to be talking with Nate Kinch. For those that don't know me, I'm Anna McAfee. I'm facilitating a lot of these conversations. World Values Day is on October 17th, which is exactly a month today on the day, obviously, we're recording. So a good time to get planning. Now, if you're not familiar with Nate, he is an ethicist, a philosopher, an organisational designer, and social entrepreneur. And I'm always very happy to talk about values in AI and tech. And today we're talking about what truly matters in the world of AI, exploring values, ethics, and the rise of the machine. Thank you so much, Nate, for agreeing to this, to allow me to interview you on this topic.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been brilliant finding out more about the organization, and I'm excited to get stuck in. I think we've got some big questions to cover.
Yeah, we do. One thing I like to ask people first, given that we do have World Values Day coming up, values are a very personal thing. Could you share one of your values with us, and maybe just either a background or just tell us how you put that value into action in everyday life?
So, like most people, I have quite a few values. Some of them are really explicit and others are more implicit, embodied, and I probably haven't even found ways to give them a linguistic frame. But over the years, I think given the nature of who I am and what I've been exposed to and what I do for work and the people that I'm exposed to through that, I've spent a good amount of time thinking about this stuff. Perhaps one example that I can give today, and it's maybe a little bit of a complicated and controversial one in some ways, is the value of truth or truthfulness. Now, this has been debated by philosophers and theorists for millennia. We've had lots of different ways of relating to the idea of truth across space-time. You know, in the West, and this is a particularly Western frame I'll give right now, the pre-modern era was, you know, largely a relation to some like higher power, you know, in the form of God, particularly the Christian God that held truth. In the modern era, due to the scientific revolution, the process of empirical science, recognizing it has many issues or even constraints and philosophical hang-ups, it became like the leading way of discovering or uncovering truth. And then many of these philosophical hang-ups have been surfaced through what's often been referred to as kind of like postmodernity or postmodern critiques. Many different types of critiques, from the feminists through to the non-Western, etc. And like modernity, I suppose postmodernity has had its strengths and weaknesses. And I probably fall into a more recent camp that is sometimes called meta-modernism or meta-modernity. And in really simple terms, that's an attempt to kind of like bring together the strengths of modernity and the strengths of postmodernity, you know, cater to some of their shortcomings, and perhaps enable us to develop like richer philosophies, sciences, and ways of being, doing, and becoming in this world. So some basic preamble. When you're talking about something like truth, a little bit of preamble probably helps. So let's just say I deeply value truth. I think I do. I really think I do. I've thought about this very deliberately. Or maybe more specifically, like I value the collective process that we can commit ourselves to that can help get us closer to truth, whatever truth may be. And I recognize something like, you know, we are finite beings. We can't step outside of the universe and see the whole thing for what it really is. Instead, what we can do through lots of different means or methods is relate to different parts at different times. And hopefully the idea is that over time, we can bring more of these parts together to develop like a better picture of what reality might be, and importantly, how we do fit or might like to fit into it. And doing something like this, Anna, like it really requires us, and this, you know, this is something like the purpose of the philosophy of science in some ways. You it requires us to recognize that propositional knowledge results from like a highly social process. And when that works well, we generate incredibly useful knowledge. But that knowledge or that truth is kind of like the most truthful right now belief that we hold. And embracing that sort of perspective requires like a pretty healthy dose of humility. It requires us to engage with lots of different perspectives, which is something that en masse we're probably not doing super well at the moment. And it requires us to find something like the wisdom of the middle way between, say, on one end of the extreme, like a deeply held absolute belief, and maybe we call that dogma just for the sake of simplicity. And then on the other end of the extreme is kind of like this belief that nothing in the outside world, like nothing outside of our own minds can ever be known. And it's sometimes called like solipsism. And I don't think either of these streams are particularly helpful in terms of how they support humanity and life on the planet at large. So, by valuing this process of truth seeking, what I'm doing or what I'm trying to do, because I think it's always an attempt, is really openly and curiously engage with different perspectives, sometimes particularly the ones that confront me in lots of different ways, then sort of take time to process these perspectives in relation to one another, test different perspectives at different times, in different ways, in different contexts. And through that process, try to develop what maybe I think of as like the most directionally truthful beliefs that I can hold at any given point in time. Now, all of that is kind of like underpinned by a deeper philosophy, but if we get into that, you're all going to need a siesta, as will I. Like this process, I got to admit, I don't always do it well. Like it's daunting. It's hard, it's confronting, it almost hurts at times, but it can also be, and it depends on how we kind of approach it, like the attitude that we take to it. It can also be fun. It can be kind of playful because you can take the mickey out of things. You can have a laugh with stuff. You don't have to take yourself or the ideas too seriously. And through that, it can be deeply enriching. And one thing I'll say just really quickly before wrapping up my attempt to answer what is a seemingly simple, but I actually think incredibly challenging question to open with. This doesn't necessarily mean this sort of perspectivism that I'm describing, this perspectival way of looking at our sort of like philosophy of science. It doesn't necessarily mean, Anna, that all ideas or perspectives are equally true, good, or useful. Actually, it's quite the opposite. But yeah, I'll stop there because there's so much to potentially cover.
Oh, it's good. Yes, it is a hard question to open with. So, and some people look at values in a very light way, and others look at them very deeply. So I really appreciate the perspective. Now, one thing that I've been involved with World Values Day for a couple of years in various forms, but one thing that I have sort of seemingly come up is the question is, what is the difference between values and ethics? And when I first came across your work as an ethicist, I thought, great, I can ask you this question, because I do think we are quite confused. And I wondered if you could perhaps explain the difference between values and ethics and why we're so confused by this topic.
Yeah, it's a big one, and it's in some ways it's quite a nuanced and tricky topic. So maybe what I'll try and do, Anna, is take a slightly simpler approach that bypasses some of the philosophical discourse, because value theory as a term or frame is used in different ways within philosophy, and sometimes I'll bypass some of that because that gets pretty dense. But what I will say is, if you are interested in the details, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy has like a really good introduction to value theory. It's not going to be for everyone, but if you are interested in that, and what I can do is maybe I can provide some links after we wrap up, if that's okay. So In really simple terms, values are things, and I don't mean things as in objects, just like ideas or stuff that we can relate to. They could be processes, people, etc. But they're things that we strive for, that we desire, and that we seek to protect. And they're the things that we kind of designate as being good. And a simple way perhaps to think about your values, if you want to reflect on this, is by asking the question, what truly matters? And there are many possible answers to the sort of like process of questioning what truly matters. I think some of them they end up being quite universal, at least from the vantage point of like a modern human being. But others can be deeply personal, and they might differ from those around you. And that itself can actually be quite confronting. But from my perspective, Anna, what really matters here is kind of like the self-reflective process of questioning what truly matters, which affords almost like the opportunity of being really honest with yourself in your attempt to live a life in alignment to the answers that you surface. And in sort of like an Aristotelian way, in the way that Aristotle might have talked about the cultivation of character, you know, the cultivation of virtue, it's an important part of that character development. And hopefully, and it's not always the case for lots of different reasons, but hopefully that's something many of us have the opportunity to do in life. So that's kind of values. A simple way of thinking about values are like what truly matters. Problematically, again, ethics, like value theory, can be described in different ways. And sometimes, for instance, philosophers will talk about ethics and morals interchangeably. Other times, they will draw quite a clear distinction between the two. So that's additionally confusing. But today, I'll suggest that ethics is the deliberative process that you execute in a given situation to align your decisions, actions, and the likely consequences to what you believe is most good and most right. So ethics is like sort of processual in nature. And the process of doing ethics is like absolutely informed, like the concrete slab of your house, the building process of building the house is the ethics. The concrete slab and the work that you do underneath the concrete slab is what you believe truly matters. So values inform and relate to ethics, and the process of doing ethics comes back, ideally, if it's working well, and informs our values. So it's kind of like a dynamic relationship. Now, I think the last part of that question is, why are people confused? Maybe I'm confused right now. Who knows? I don't know for sure, but I'd suggest it's something to do with the fact that, like and we kind of covered on this a little bit, philosophers still debate these terms, and they often use them in different ways.
I was about to say that. I think you'd said earlier, yeah, it's because the definitions and the way philosophers are, or, you know, modern day thinkers are, they're using the words so interchangeably that maybe that is what is causing the confusion.
And we sometimes have equivocation as well. So sometimes there's actually quite neat definitional scoping. Other times there's equivocation, and that sort of means that we're using the same word in different ways. And so we're almost like talking at each other. So ethics, or values, or value theory, just, you know, for the sake of simplicity. And if we were tighter with our language, which actually, to the credit of the community, or, you know, the community of professional philosophers, that's one thing that philosophers like deeply value, because we use language as a way to try and explain things, recognizing it's only a map of a much broader territory. But I think that's a big one. And then, maybe part B is, well, not many people are trained in philosophy. So if you're not trained in philosophy and you're hearing all of this stuff, you're kind of like, what do they even mean? Why can't they agree on this stuff? And then it just blows your mind. It becomes additionally confusing. I think part C is that we don't live in a culture that values this stuff, pun intended, like as much as we probably should. And D, but this is not a non-exhaustive list, of course, information is so prolific now, like it's everywhere, ideas, opinions, etc. But passing information for its veracity or truthfulness is not. So the kind of like noise to signal ratio is way out of whack. Lots and lots of noise, very few signals. And amidst the noise, it's hard to figure out what is the signal. And so I think it's actually really easy to be confused about lots of topics. I'll give you a simple example. You look at the nutritional sciences literature, which has been a long-held area of interest for me. The actual guidance from nutrition and dietetics associations hasn't changed that much over the last few decades. It's remained pretty consistent. You know, eat a diet that's predominated by whole foods. You know, if you can eat local and stuff like that, great. But that comes typically with certain privileges, particularly economic, and even just the geography you're in. You know, if you're going to eat meat, try and eat good quality meat. Try to keep your saturated fat intake down, yada, yada, yada. Don't drink too much alcohol. Like it's pretty consistent. But if you go on Instagram, I'm actually not on Instagram, thankfully, but I know many people that are. You go on Instagram, the health advice that you get from people is so wide ranging. It's like, no wonder people are confused. So one of the, just quickly on that, who we in formal parlance, like epistemically defer to, like who we defer our knowledge to, is really important. And because there's lower trust in institutions than there has been in quite some time, sometimes for very good reason, actually. And institutions need to become far more accountable for a lot of different stuff. But because of various misdemeanors, mistakes, et cetera, this, you know, this decreasing sort of like trust in certain institutions, a lot of people trust no institutions. And they're just as likely to trust some random health influencer as they are to trust, I don't know, the American Dietetics Association, which kind of doesn't make sense. So don't want to get down that rabbit hole, but that's, you know, just to, yeah, maybe a way to clarify why some of us, maybe including myself on many different occasions, are so confused about stuff.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And you're right. We do. Who we take our advice from is interesting, and it's probably a good segue into my next question, which is, how can we use values and ethics to make more informed decisions in complex situations? And this is probably where we're heading into the territory about sort of responsible AI and tech, yes. Which is a very complex situation. So how do value and ethics, how can we use those to make more informed decisions?
Yeah, so look, it's a big and complex world in a lot of ways, Anna. We can never have all of the information. Sometimes we have very good information, but you know, it's only ever it's like a partial map of like a really large territory. But I think the beauty here is our values can act as like powerful heuristics for very purposeful decision making, especially when we have like suboptimal access to sort of like the facts of a given situation. The problem here, however, is that just having some values doesn't seem to do much, especially in an organizational setting. Like we need ways to translate and act on our values and then demonstrate how those values have encouraged us to act in certain ways. And that's a lot harder than just thinking about your values. And doing that process is kind of like a big part of the work that I do with organizations. But coming back to sort of like everyday life, I think there are a bunch of simple ways that you can sort of like surface and document your values and then like explicitly reflect on them when making a decision. And this is often going to be good enough. And I don't think you have to obsess about trying to be perfect in this process. It's going to be good enough in the sense that like it's way better than doing nothing at all, which is really important. you know, we often have these idealized pictures of things, and that's almost like demotivating. Often what we have to do is put the left foot in front of the right, and trust that process to some extent. So what I think really matters in an everyday setting is that we do that when relevant, explicitly. And if you're going to do it, let's say you've got a big decision to make, do that process on paper. And the reason that I'd suggest doing it in a tactile manner is because it affects our brain and sort of like our physiology differently than if we do it on a screen. And that's not to say that if you don't have a pencil and a piece of paper handy or a whiteboard or whatever it may be, it's not worth doing. It absolutely is. It's just, you're going to be slightly richer experience. And that could be as simple as like sketching out your values using something like a spider plot, you know, with, and then basically asking questions about how the values relate to the decision. And then through that process, you'll probably do some really great reflection. You'll produce a cool visual about your values that you can show your friends. Good pub talk. And have the opportunity to be like really real with yourself. Imagine if we were doing that, right? You go to the pub on a Friday or whatever, and you're like, hey, look at my spider plot with my values. That would be fun. But you know,
some people don't like small talk, so
that's yes,
really exciting.
I don't. I hate it. So that's something we should do. But you know, that process itself, it won't always be easy. And one of the things when I'm teaching people how to do this value sensitive reflection or any type of practical approach to ethics, one of the hardest things that folks struggle with is just making what was previously quite implicit explicit. It's really hard. So don't be hard on yourself. Be compassionate, be kind. Recognize it's going to take time. You're going to stumble. It's going to feel tricky. You're going to want to give up. But probably know as well that you're capable of doing it. It's both harder and easier than you think. And I think a general sort of statement that's reasonably defensible, it will probably almost certainly be like overall good in terms of your development as a person doing this type of stuff. In addition to that, however, I think you can engage in practices that reflect your values. So let's say you care about something like, and this really matters to me, like protecting the beauty of nature. So every day you could spend time in your garden. You could, if you're afforded the privilege, you could walk in the forest or bush. You could do some guerrilla gardening. I do a lot of guerrilla gardening, and to try and kind of like support local biodiversity, like very place-based approach to cultivating biodiversity. I actually have a wonderful book that's titled Growing Biodiversity in Your Backyard, which is really cool. And the more you can consistently practice or even ritualize, like bring that practice into some type of communal setting, the easier it is to like embody, and the more likely it is to really become part of your way of being in this world. So yeah, you can do it in some specific context, like, oh, I've got to make a big decision about where to send my kids to school. Really, really powerful way of doing it. But there are actually some quite simple ways that you can integrate it into your life and make it really fun and purposeful and social. In an organization, it's a little bit different. And I'm not going to get into the details because we'd get bogged down. But a lot of the work I do, Anna, is about developing socio-technical systems for ethical decision-making. And the idea there is like, how do we enhance the capacity that organizations have to consistently make good quality ethical decisions, like across or throughout the organization writ large? And in some ways, you could almost liken that to helping the organization cultivate or develop its character and get better at doing more of what truly matters and less of what doesn't. And that might even be the important point in any applied context, like being clear about our values and, you know, in the way that I've defined them, recognizing not everyone's going to define them that way, and then engaging in the process of ethics, recognizing not everyone's going to define ethics that way, and we're cool with that for now. I think it massively increases the likelihood that we do what truly matters. And this sounds so cliche, and I hope you don't go, oh, but the more of us doing what truly matters, like, and you know, and less of what doesn't, of course, the better chance we have of living in something like a world that we most want to live in, that we desire for, that we strive for, that we seek to protect. And a little plug for something I'm doing, if that's okay, Anna. I'm running a free online workshop series with the Royal Society of the Arts. And we're teaching people in a, like, so we're hosting these with like sort of virtual whiteboards, like a Miro whiteboard, virtual whiteboard. And we're teaching folks from all different backgrounds, practical approaches to doing ethics. And so that's another link that I can provide after this. So if you're interested, it's very different to if you were going to go do like a introduction to moral philosophy at university. We skip over a lot of that stuff necessarily and get right into the practical detail. And if you're interested in how, you can just do this better in everyday life, or perhaps more importantly, just for me, because it's more related to my work, how you can do this better at work, it could be a really good, like 2 hours of your time.
Yeah, great. No, do send the links. I can share that to the World Values Day pages as well.
Brilliant.
I want to talk to you about AI because it is probably one of the most complex situations complex situations that is developing right before our eyes. And I suppose specifically about responsible AI. Can you explain what responsible AI is, kind of what it should be, and what's the gap in between those two?
So let me start with maybe like a definition from like the National AI Centre here in Australia. I'm not saying it's like a broadly agreed definition, but at least it's good enough. So they refer to responsible AI as the practice of developing and using AI systems in a way that benefits individuals, groups, and our wider society, while minimizing, or it probably should be mitigating, the risk of negative consequences. So that, let's just say that's a working definition. It's probably good enough. It often takes the form of, like, within an organization, and they start by establishing some type of need. Hey, we need to do AI responsibly. I'm not even going to get into how fluffy and messy, and there's a lot of stuff we could talk about there that would probably be quite fun, actually, but would get sidetracked. Then they'll agree on some responsible AI principles. Huge amount of work being done globally on that, by the way. They fit into quite a tight normal distribution. So that what I mean by that is there's quite a lot of coherence around the principles. Most folks that are studying this stuff tend to agree that, yeah, these are the types of principles. Then they have to figure out how to operationalize those principles reasonably well. That's really the hard part. And for various reasons, that is not happening anywhere near as well as it could. So there's a very big gap. And it's going to depend on organization and, the specific system that's being developed and its context of use and all this different type of stuff. The resources available to the organization, all the nuances and caveats. But yeah, there's this big gap between what the organizations say they should be doing and how they're actually behaving. And that's more general, actually, and maybe we get to talk about that later. There's a good reference point, though. So I know that people might be tuning in from around the world, but if you're here in Australia, we have something called the Responsible AI Maturity Index, which is led by a research firm called Fifth Quadrant. And we've had a few reports now, maybe 3 or 4. And what that consistently demonstrates, although there's a slight narrowing of the gap, consistently demonstrates that there's broad agreement on the principles and very little responsible AI maturity. Although the most recent version, which was maybe published a month or so ago, shows that there is some enhancement in maturity. So that's kind of like what I suppose responsible AI is supposed to be. There's a significant gap between what it is presently and what it could be, as in what it purports to be. And then, yeah, I'm not sure if you asked, I can't actually remember, sorry, Anna, if you asked why that was, but...
Yeah, it's just what is responsible AI, kind of what it should be. And there's obviously a gap between those two things.
Significant. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, where are those what are the blind spots?
Well, that's a useful way of attacking it. So it's a very brutal language. I don't know. It's you sometimes say stuff like that, and it's like it's just a conditioning. Approaching it, it's fascinating that, right? You catch yourself on sort of unconscious biases that sometimes express. And okay, so how do I say this? I'm not going to swear, even though I am very supportive of healthy profanity. The blind spots are everywhere. They're absolutely everywhere. So one big example is like the material realities of AI seem to be so much worse than expected. And they're certainly far, far worse than the companies developing them are suggesting. And by this, I mean that the systems that we're developing and how we're using them have significant effects on planetary boundaries, like the Earth systems that make life possible. And like much of what we're doing as a species, like we're just materially unsustainable, you know. So that's one. There's also very sloppy language. I know we talked about that briefly before, but very sloppy language. AI means a million different things. And it's like the definition keeps getting broader and broader and broader and broader. And AI has an interesting history, quite a mythological history, well prior to the 57 work kicking off in Dartmouth. So, and a lot of people have forgotten that or haven't actually studied it, which is interesting, because a huge amount of people are working in AI at the moment, probably without much understanding of its historicity, as in like its historical accuracy. We also have big claims being made about like the capacity an algorithm has for subjectivity or sentience or consciousness or thinking, feeling, affect, etc., etc. And a lot of this rhetoric is also very sloppy and not grounded in the philosophy of mind, which is very extensive literature, and the related sciences, the psychological sciences, recognizing that's very broad, neuroscience, cognitive sciences, etc. But I think the biggest blind spot is the fact that we are doing all of this because we can. We're not doing it because we should. And by that, I mean, we're not doing it because it's like the good and right thing based on what we believe truly matters. Never has there been some deep, integrous, and highly participatory approach to asking, hey, should we build these systems? If so, how should we build them? For what purposes? What are valid purposes? What overall checks and balances need to be in place? Like, who gets a say into how they might evolve? And now, don't get me wrong, EU AI Act, and there's lots of different things happening, right? Smart, talented, caring people trying. But relative to the pace at which this is moving within the quote unquote free market, a bit sarcastic about that deliberately, there's a massive gap there. And I think just, I'll build upon that, that little subtle dig, or maybe not so subtle dig. One of the ways of looking at this is through the sort of engine, I use that deliberately, a mechanistic sort of analogy or metaphor, of modern capitalism, which largely exists to accumulate more capital. And AI is really just servicing the needs of the capital owners in many ways. Like, that's what it's doing. Now, I'm not the first to suggest this as a critique, and you might go, oh gosh, that sounds very Marxist. I don't necessarily think that's bad in a binary sense. There were plenty of important, useful, thoughtful contributions in that body of work. It's also not that simple. We're very in this kind of like, we love extremes, we love binaries, etc. If you're not a hardcore capitalist, then you're a goddamn commie. It's like, well, you think there are only two ways to socially organize a complex global civilization? Like, that is so intellectually, relationally sloppy. It's ridiculous. But I think the bigger problem, and AI is just like part of this, like a property of this, the bigger problem is that our system of capital accumulation is life eroding. And one simple way to qualify that is the very tight relation between GDP, gross domestic product, and environmental degradation. I think there's somewhere between 99 and 100% correlated. And we've been trying to do what's called sustainable growth theory, or green growth, for a number of decades now, and it's just not working. We're not seeing what would formerly be referred to as sufficient absolute decoupling. Now, I'm not suggesting here, there's a bunch of technical terms in there, don't worry about them too much for now. I'm not suggesting that there's necessarily some like evil conspiracy per se. That's not the suggestion, but it does mean that we can't continue on this current trajectory if we want a decent future. And by decent, like I mean literally a world where people's material needs are met within what is referred to as the safe operating zone of planetary boundaries. And for folks that aren't familiar with that, please look that up. It's one of the most important reference points for any human alive right now. The safe operating zone is not a political target. It's a biophysical constraint. It doesn't care whether you're left, right, up, down, in, out. Like it doesn't, none of that matters. It's a biophysical constraint. And we've currently transgressed 6 of 9 planetary boundaries. And so I think coming back to it, so there's all these blind spots, Anna, but like if AI is really to deliver significant benefits to humanity and world at large, to contribute to what truly matters, it probably needs to be developed and used within a totally different socioeconomic paradigm.
Yeah, interesting. And do you think Pierre had a great comment there, so I thought I'd bring that up on screen. Do you think AI can solve some of these issues in terms of the, fixing the way we live within planetary boundaries? I mean, is there?
So there are some.
Could that be responsible AI? Or
yeah, so that's really interesting, right? Because responsible AI tends to again is a product of like it has emerged within sort of like a neoliberal capitalist paradigm, right? And so it can't be sort of decoupled from that. Now, that's not to say that it's bad or it's not helpful or all of these different types of things. If we've taken anything away from today, please take nuance, right? Like, but the normative orientation, like the goal orientation, like what's the direction we ought to be heading in because it's good and right? Yeah, I think you're about right, Anna. Like that is yes. But that should also be true of almost everything. Now, that's not to suggest that we flip the switch overnight. We have to biodegrade the old in service of the new. There's all different types of complex things that we have to do at different scales, temporalities, yada, yada, yada. But yeah, like we really should be. It's interesting. So just touching on this. So I would say we have this massive wisdom deficit in society and culture today. And there's no broadly agreed definition of what wisdom is. I think it's something like the process of knowing, deeply caring for and living in like close relation to what truly matters. I think that's a nice definition. And there are many others. There are technical definitions. Like there's one cognitive scientist I've heard refer to it as rationally self-transcending rationality. And most people just go, what does that mean? But so like push that one to the side. Wisdom being something like the ability to know, deeply care for, and live in meaningful relation to what truly matters. And if that's the case, if we are cultivating our character, our wisdom, our collective wisdom, we have to get really good at restraint, because doing more of what truly matters necessarily, like it's implicit, but we can make it explicit, means doing less of what doesn't, which means applying restraint, which means not just saying, hey, we can do this, let's do it. It means, oh, we can do this, like it's technically possible, or we have the resources, we could direct them this way, but should we? Like, is it actually aligned to the direction that we want to be going in? So look, I would love to imagine a world where that was how we made decisions, where we brought the best of head and heart together, to sort of use that very simple terminology, and where we did so in a way that truly reflected the kind of like beauty of our diversity, whilst also recognizing that we are so fundamentally the same in so many of the ways that really matter. Like, and I believe that's possible. I don't think it's probable. But yeah, like I love that. And I think that is the direction that we need to pursue. Whether we ever get there is a different story.
Interesting. I could talk all day, Nate, but I think we're probably, we might exhaust the audience attention. But yeah, it's fascinating. I've heard you write in your newsletter, which, by the way, is a great way to keep in touch with Nate's work. It's trustworthy by design.substack.com.
That's it.
So please do. I'll put that in the description. If you're watching this replay on YouTube, that will be there. So please do subscribe to that. But one thing I've heard you talk about, Nate, is the values gap. Can you explain what the values gap is and how we overcome it for future generations? And I think you alluded to this sort of as you were talking in the last question. So it's probably a nice question to end on.
Yeah. Look, the former part of that question is much easier than the latter, to be honest, Anna. So very simply, the values gap is the gap between what we say we value and the way we behave. For organizations, this seems to be huge. Donald Sull and colleagues back in 2020 from MIT did a pretty significant body of work on this, and they don't even reckon there's a statistical correlation between what organizations say they value and how they behave. So that's a bit of a news flash maybe for some folks, and I'll provide that reference. But let me give you an example, right? And I'll throw myself under the bus here. So I'm a proper tree hugger in many ways, like literally I hug trees when I'm in the bush. Maybe not even when I'm in the bush, just outside. But I also drive a car. Now it's an EV, but the material realities of making an EV are actually pretty horrific. And I don't think we do a good job of exposing those realities. Many ways of looking at something like that might suggest there's a contradiction, and I think there is. You know, I'm living within this system. I'm not separate from it. I've got to take my daughter to school. I've got to run errands, which feels like half my life running errands, and then, you know, do a bunch of other stuff. We're joking about this before, like the realities of being a parent. And there are other ways that I can do that, like riding in public transport. I sometimes do that. But given my mobility needs, you know, this is by far the highest utility option. And I mean by far, like probably saves me a couple of hours a day. And you see what I've done there? Like I've maybe just brought another value or a set of values into play. I sort of referred to them broadly as utility, and arguably some of what I'm calling utility are more needs than values, but just push that nuance to the side. Our values often come into tension. In fact, sometimes they're directly contradictory. Sometimes we have to trade them off against one another, or in a slightly less severe case, we have to weight one value higher than the other, you know, and give it sort of like more credence or credibility or time or effort or whatever it may be. This is not about being perfect. It's about committing to, I'm going to sound like some self-help guru. I apologize for this. It's like, it's about committing to your best daily. I hate saying stuff like this, but I feel it's true. Like, it's about
some people need to hear it over and over again.
Yeah, you know, it's like it's about committing to your best daily. So, and the cool thing about that, and again, I do apologize for this. Like, it's like your best today is going to look bad tomorrow, and over time, that can quickly have huge effects, like better again, up to a point, of course, depending on, you know, what's actually in focus. And I think if we're to become a more value sensitive culture, where we spend more time thinking about and then acting on what truly matters, we really need to embrace, and actually this is really important. I feel this is really important. We need to embrace the possibility of our individual and collective improvement. Like, we're not stuck, we're not determined. We have cognitive agency. We have the capacity to care for something deeply, then live more of our life in service of that thing that we care for, whether it be love in its various forms or real education, emphasizing the real, diversity, biodiversity, truth or truthfulness, freedom of artistic expression, like, I don't know, whatever it is, or anything else. And we need not be perfect today. We just have to be better than yesterday. And of course, at the sort of macro scale or level, there are so many nuances to how this plays out, as in where we intervene in systems to make this more likely, the ways in which we support people how we work across multiple scales, from sort of like the deep inner self through to the family, through to the community, through to the bioregion, through to the nation state, through to nation state, yada, yada, yada. But I think this is the general message. We have to believe that we can do more of what truly matters, and then we have to prove that to ourselves daily. And I feel like I've personally been on this journey for many years, but there was a significant period in 2022, Anna, that a horrific period in lots of ways, that sparked a huge amount of progress in me. It was like necessary. And I transformed myself, you know, and in this way, I proved to myself that meaningful transformation in relation to what I care about, to what I truly care about, is possible. And yeah, so I'm living proof. And I think that first person experience does matter. You know, we don't necessarily give as much credence or credibility or whatever to one person's experience as we do to the totality of some body of evidence, but like, it really matters to me. And I've got so many reasons, both sort of like phenomenological, my first person experience, and the years and years and thousands of hours I've spent studying philosophy and science and practicing philosophy. I believe this to be true for almost every person on the planet. So yeah, I think we need to believe that we have the capacity to do more of what truly matters. And then I think we need to challenge ourselves and each other, and hold ourselves and each other accountable to do more of that every single day going forward.
Here. That's a really, really great statement. And I think a really good lesson from this conversation. As I said, I could talk all day, but we're at sort of over 45 minutes, and I think we might call it there. But please, if you have watched, look out for the links. If you watch the replay, please see the comments below. We will have the links that Nate has mentioned throughout this conversation. Nate, I appreciate you. I appreciate your time, your inspiration, and your dedication to this work. And thank you again for being here.
Thanks, Anna. And yeah, just a shout out to the work that you do, and you know, the organization that is World Values Day. You know, let's hope in 5 to 10 years time, like, this is a thing that we take much more seriously, and importantly, you know, we translate from a day to our everyday, like embodying that on an everyday basis. So yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Well, very welcome. Yes, and that is the point. It's not about one day. It's about starting the conversations that day, so it, you know, reverberates throughout the year and many years to come. Thank you again. Thank you to those that have stayed with us for watching, and we look forward to more of these conversations. Thanks everyone.
Anna. Thanks, folks.